The most selfish emotion a human being can feel is pity. When the young boy tried to nurse a mangled bird back to health, the wise master took it from his hands and left it to the wolves.
You are not crying for the bird,
The master said coldly.
you are crying because you lack the stomach to face how nature truly heals.
The master was Kalen, a man carved from the very obsidian that jutted out of the jagged crags of the northern ridge. His hands were leathered, thick with calluses, and deeply scarred from decades working the great forge at the edge of the cliff. The sharp metallic scent of burning coal and hot iron clung to him like a second skin, mixing with the biting frost of the mountain air. He did not speak softly. He spoke with the brutal rhythm of his hammer. Beside him stood Elias. Elias was young, his shoulders narrow, his eyes wide and clouded with the soft, fragile ideals of the lowland cities. He wore a woolen cloak far too thin for the merciless wind that howled through the canyon. He still believed the world could be saved through sheer intention and gentle hands. Kalen struck the glowing metal on his anvil with terrifying force. A violent shower of orange sparks hissed as they hit the deep snow. The iron shrieked under the blow. Elias flinched, stepping back from the heat. The cold in this high country was absolute. It did not negotiate. It did not bargain. It did not care about the warmth in a young man's heart. Elias wiped a smear of soot from his pale cheek, shivering as the forge fire died down to a smoldering red. He stepped closer to the waning heat. His shoulders slumped beneath a heavy burden he had carried all the way up the treacherous mountain path.
Master,
Elias began, his voice thin and trembling against the constant roar of the wind.
down in the valley there is a man named Silas. He refuses to work the fields. He drinks the fermented grain and sleeps in the mud. Yet the village elders keep feeding him from the winter stores out of pity. The frost has come early. The harvest was poor. The children will go hungry before the spring thaw. I tried to tell the elders to stop giving him our rations, but they cursed me. They called me heartless.
Elias looked up, his jaw tight with unresolved guilt.
Am I cruel, Kalen? Is it a sin to let a man starve when he authors his own ruin?
Kalen slowly lowered his massive hammer. The heavy iron thudded against the ashwood block with a dull, final sound. Silence settled over the forge, thick and suffocating. He turned his deep-set, ash-gray eyes toward his apprentice. He saw the boy's inner turmoil, the desperate need to be perceived as good. Kalen walked to the precipice, looking down at the gray fog swallowing the valley floor.
They are not feeding him to save him.
Kalen grumbled, his voice grinding like rough stone.
They feed him so they do not have to endure the guilt of watching him perish. They trade their children's survival for the comfort of a clean conscience.
He turned his back on the valley.
Words will not carve this truth into your marrow. Bring your cloak. We walk.
They descended the jagged spine of the mountain into the lower timberline. The bitter cold snapped at their faces like a whip. Elias struggled to match Kalen's massive, unforgiving strides until they reached the ruins of an abandoned apple orchard. In the center stood an ancient, towering tree. Its thick lower limb was black with blight, weeping a foul sap. Someone had carefully wrapped the dying branch in oil-soaked rags, binding it to the trunk with heavy rope, hoping to mend the decay. Kalen drew a hunting knife from his belt. He stepped forward and slashed the ropes. The rags fell away. Instantly, the rotting limb snapped under its own dead weight, tearing a massive, gaping wound straight down the center of the trunk. Inside, the heartwood was spongy and black. The rot had spread deep into the core. Kalen pointed the steel blade at the dripping wound.
The farmer pitied the dying branch.
Kalen said, his breath pluming white in the freezing air.
He could not bear to cut away the sickness, so he bandaged the rot.
Kalen drove the knife deep into the diseased trunk.
Pity is the poison that consumes the healthy roots to comfort the dead leaves.
They pushed further down the trail, reaching a wind-scoured ridge overlooking the frozen northern pass. Down below, a merchant's caravan struggled through the deepening snowdrifts. Elias watched as the lead ox stumbled, its front leg shattering with a sickening crack. It bellowed in agony. The merchant immediately halted the entire train. He threw thick wool blankets over the broken beast, kneeling in the snow to force water down its throat. The sun was sinking behind the peaks. The blizzard was closing in. The remaining oxen and drivers stood motionless in the waist-deep snow, freezing as the precious daylight vanished. Kalen gripped Elias by the shoulder, forcing him to watch.
Look closely.
The master commanded, his voice devoid of mercy.
He cannot stomach the guilt of putting a blade to the throat of the fallen beast, so he halts the entire herd.
Kalen's eyes were like iron as he watched the inevitable doom settling below.
He believes he is a kind man, but he is dragging the strong into the grave to soothe his own fragile conscience.
Kalen released his grip.
True cruelty is sacrificing the vital fire of life merely to warm a corpse.
Down in the pass, the wind intensified, burying the shivering caravan in a whiteout. Kalen did not look back. He simply began walking toward the edge of the jagged cliff, stepping where the treacherous ice hung loose over the black void. Elias stood frozen, staring at the master's back as the storm swallowed them both, the silence between them heavier than the snow. Elias stood frozen, staring at the master's back as the storm swallowed them both, the silence between them heavier than the snow. Slowly, the apprentice forced his numb legs to move, tracing the deep impressions Kalen's boots left in the drifts. They walked until the howling wind funneled into a narrow, shadowy ravine of sheer black stone. Here, half buried beneath a weeping drift of snow, lay a tragic monument to human frailty. Two figures were frozen solid against the rock wall. One was a broad-shouldered traveler, his thick fur coat dusted with frost. In his rigid, lifeless arms, he clutched a frail, emaciated figure whose flesh bore the undeniable dark mottling of the blood plague. It was a sickness that had clearly claimed the smaller man long before the winter chill arrived. Kalen brushed the snow from the traveler's frozen face. The man's muscles were still locked in a desperate, final strain. His eyes were wide open, staring blindly into the blizzard.
He was strong,
Kalen said, his voice cutting through the whistling wind.
His legs could have carried him to the summit fires. His provisions were full, but he refused to leave the dead to the earth.
Kalen stood up, his massive frame blocking the biting wind.
He strapped a rotting corpse to his chest and called it loyalty. He pitied the dead, and so he invited the frost to stop his own beating heart. Pity is the heavy anchor that drags the capable down into the abyss of the doomed.
They left the frozen tomb behind, ascending toward the upper timberline where the storm broke, revealing the pale, shivering light of the winter sun. As they reached a high, rocky overlook, Kalen raised a scarred, leathered hand pointing toward a solitary ridge. A massive timber wolf, old and battle-scared, was pinned beneath a fallen boulder. Its hind leg was crushed beyond repair, trapped beneath a ton of unyielding granite. The beast was not howling. It was not waiting for the mercy of the elements. With a terrifying primal calm, the wolf was systematically tearing at its own ruined flesh, gnawing through the trapped limb to sever the dead weight. Blood stained the snow, vibrant and stark. Finally, with a violent pull, the wolf broke free. It stood on 3 legs, bleeding but breathing, and limped toward the shelter of the dark pines. Kalen's ash-gray eyes locked onto Elias.
He does not pity his own flesh.
The master murmured, the words heavy with reverence.
He does not wait for a miracle to lift the stone. He demands the brutal agony of the teeth to save the living heart. He severs the rot to preserve the vital fire. True mercy, Elias, is always born from the blade.
Elias stared at the trail of crimson left by the surviving beast. His trembling ceased. The naive, soft illusions of the valley slowly fractured beneath the crushing weight of the mountain's truth. Kalen turned to face his apprentice, the pale sun casting long, harsh shadows across his weathered face. He raised his massive hands, removing his thick leather gauntlets. He held his palms out to the biting cold. They were a landscape of brutal survival, thick with burn scars, jagged cuts, and calluses forged by decades of striking, unyielding iron.
To be a master of your own life is not to bleed for every wound you encounter.
Kalen commanded, his voice a low, rumbling earthquake.
It is to know precisely which wounds must be left to bleed out. It is not about softening the blow for those who refuse to stand. It is about hardening the iron of your own spine to withstand the inevitable strike.
Kalen stepped closer, towering over the boy, the metallic scent of the distant forge seemingly returning on the shifting wind.
It is not about wrapping the rusted steel in fine silk. It is about thrusting the decayed metal back into the unforgiving fire until the impurities burn away to ash. You believe pity is a virtue. You believe it is a sign of your elevated soul, but pity is a thief. It steals the brutal lesson the universe is trying to teach the weak. When you pity the rusted blade, you do not heal it. You merely dull your own sharpening stone.
The master lowered his hands, letting the cold wind howl around them.
Cruelty is not leaving a man to the consequences of his own ruin. True cruelty is sacrificing your own precious warmth to thaw a man who actively chooses to freeze.
The narrative lens slowly pulls away from the freezing mountain pass, shifting the absolute weight of Kalen's unyielding stare directly through the screen. You sit in your comfortable rooms, surrounded by soft walls and controlled climates, wondering why your life feels so incredibly heavy. You are carrying corpses up the mountain. You are carefully bandaging rotting wood. You give your energy, your time, and your very soul to people and situations that do nothing but drain the vital fire from your veins. You justify this exhaustion. You call it empathy. You call it love. You tell yourself that your endless patience will eventually cure their self-inflicted wounds. But nature does not recognize your noble intentions. Nature only recognizes survival and decay. Every ounce of pity you pour into an empty vessel is stolen from your own ascent. You are freezing in the snow while holding on to people who have already surrendered to the cold. You must possess the stomach to look at the crushed limb and bring down the blade. Stop soothing the rot. Stop mourning the rust. Sever the dead weight. Leave it to the wolves. Walk into the fire alone.